Our first yoga tool for our first module is the breath. So we're going to be learning a lot of things about yoga. When we think about yoga, a lot of times we immediately think about the physical postures, the asanas of yoga, and that's one part of it. We'll be learning about the asanas, we'll be learning about breath work, pranayama, we'll be learning about yoga history and philosophy, and a whole lot of other stuff as well. But the most important, the simplest tool for yoga is the breath. And we often say in yoga that if you can breathe, you can do yoga. We often say that conscious breathing is the simplest form of yoga. So in other words, when we bring attention to our breath, we are doing yoga. When we bring attention and intention into our breath, we're doing yoga. And so when we practice yoga, when we practice the physical asanas, for instance, we're always going to be breathing with that physical movement. So I often think about yoga as movement plus breath equals yoga. One simple formula, one of many different formula for what yoga is. So the breath. So as you probably know, we breathe and we do so automatically, right? We don't have to think about our breathing. Our body just does it for us. If we are alive, we are breathing. If we are breathing, we are alive. Now, we're probably getting into some gray area there, right? If you're on a respirator, are you alive? Let's not get into all of the philosophical things. Let's just kind of assume for now that if you are breathing, you are alive. And if you are alive, your body is doing your breathing for you. So part of yoga is becoming more aware of that breath. So a lot of us, when we breathe, we walk around and we breathe very shallowly at the very top of our lungs. Think for a moment how large the organs are of the lungs, right? The lungs are very large organs that take up a lot of space in our bodies. And yet a lot of us just breathe in that most shallow part of our lungs, the very top of our lungs. And so just take a moment to just take a couple deep breaths. You can close or open your eyes, just breathing in through the nose and out through the nose, and just notice what that breath feels like. Okay, so let's do that now. Continue to do that breathing in through the nose, out through the nose. What are you noticing? What are you noticing about the depth of your breath? What are you noticing about the length of your breath, the texture of your breath? Where does your breath go? When we make these observations, we are coming in as observers and not critics, as witnesses of that experience and not judges. So right now we're just noticing that breath. In through the nose, out through the nose. Part of that in through the nose, out through the nose helps us to retain body heat as we practice yoga. So if you start to get too warm when you're breathing, exhale out through the mouth instead. There's no real hard set rules here. So what did you notice about that breath? Did you notice that it was maybe staying in that upper part of your chest? When we breathe in that upper part of our lungs, that tends toward anxiety, right? Short breaths, we're not getting a lot of that oxygen into our lungs. That oxygen's not being circulated throughout our bodies. It's staying very shallow. So the mind and body connections of yoga are related to that breath as well. So later we're going to talk about other kinds of breathing techniques. There's a ton of them. Pranayama, again, is the Sanskrit word for breathing in yoga. And we'll start to talk about different ways to use the breath, different ways to move the breath. We'll start to talk about like the three-part breath. So we talked a little bit about those upper lungs, right? The upper lung part of the breath, the first part of the three-part breath that moves down then into the rib cage and then down into the belly. So part of what we'll be practicing in addition to that mindfulness to our breathing is those different breathing techniques and the way to deepen the breath. We're going to talk about lower body breathing. We're going to talk about belly breathing. We're going to, again, do a lot of different techniques. But that simplest form of yoga, again, is just conscious attention to the breath. So right there, and you notice I put my hand on my chest, and we'll talk about all the things that can mean, and that being a a comforting of yourself as well, but also a way to kind of notice the breath. So if you like that, let's just try a few more breaths, and maybe you put your hand on your heart center, or maybe you don't. And maybe you already know, and maybe you already notice that we can start to let that breath lengthen a little bit. We can let it start to deepen a little bit. And when we start to breathe and bring attention to the breath, we're already changing the breath. We're already probably making it a little bit deeper, a little bit longer. And by doing that, we're also helping to calm our nervous systems. And so we probably maybe already know that breathing can be a really great tool for stress relief. If you have a presentation to make, or a test to take, or any kind of stressful situation that you might find yourself in, stopping for a moment, taking a few deep breaths really does make an automatic, immediate difference. So that's our starting point of breath in this class, breath as the tool. So again, just that inhale in through the nose, exhale out through the nose, out through the mouth if you're too warm. And so as you're going through the work of this module, maybe come back to this tool a few times, right? Read a little bit, take a few deep breaths, start to write your post, take a few deep breaths, right? And just come back to this tool as often as you need it, as often as you think about it. And that'll be, again, one of our building blocks for learning more about yoga.